Welcome to the stories in the Arabian Nights. Before you begin watching, please note that this video is primarily focused on voice narration. While there are a few illustrations to highlight key moments, the story is mostly conveyed through the spoken word. The images included are meant to complement the narration, not tell the story visually. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the immersive storytelling. Thank you for your understanding and happy listening. The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night. Brought to you by House of Innovation, Singapore. This is how it all began. In truth, the deeds and words of those who came before us serve as examples and lessons for people today. These stories allow us to see what happened to others and take heed from their experiences. By reading about the lives of past peoples and the events that shaped them, we can learn to live wisely and with restraint. Praise, therefore, be to the one who has made the histories of the past a lesson for the present. Among such examples are the stories known as A Thousand Nights and a Night, filled with their famous legends and wonders. It is told, but only the Creator knows all things, for He is all-knowing, all-powerful, honored, giving, gracious, and merciful, that, long ago, there was a king of the Sasanian dynasty, ruling over the islands of India and China. This king commanded armies, servants, and followers in great numbers. He had two sons, one was a grown man, and the other still young, though both were brave knights. The elder was a more skilled horseman than the younger, and he inherited the kingdom after their father's death. The elder son became the ruler, governing his lands with such fairness and justice that he was beloved by all the people of his capital and kingdom. His name was King Shahryar, and he appointed his younger brother, Shah Zaman, as the king of Samarkand in the lands of Barbaria. For 20 years, they both ruled their respective realms with equity and fairness, ensuring that their subjects lived in peace and prosperity. However, after 20 years, King Shahryar began to long for his younger brother and felt a strong desire to see him again. He discussed this with his vizier, who advised against a personal visit and instead suggested that the king send a letter and a gift, inviting his brother to visit him. Following this advice, King Shahryar prepared magnificent presents, including horses with saddles adorned with gemstones, slaves, beautiful handmaidens, and exquisite, expensive goods. He then wrote a letter expressing his deep affection and desire to see his brother, ending with the words, "I hope, dear brother, that you will make the effort to come and visit me. I have sent my vizier to arrange your journey, as my greatest wish is to see you before I die. If you delay or do not come, the sadness may be too much for me to bear. Peace be upon you." King Shahryar sealed the letter and gave it, along with the gifts, to his vizier. He ordered him to make the journey as quickly as possible. The vizier replied, "I hear and obey," and immediately set about preparing for the journey. After 3 days of packing and organizing, he said his farewells to the king and began the long journey, traveling through deserts, hills, rocky terrain, and lush meadows, without stopping for rest, day or night. Whenever he entered a realm ruled by one of King Shahryar's vassals, he was greeted with magnificent gifts of gold, silver, and rare treasures. He would stay there for 3 days, in accordance with the custom of hospitality, and on the fourth day, he would leave, escorted with honor for a full day's march. When the vizier approached Shah Zaman's court in Samarkand, he sent ahead one of his senior officials to announce his arrival. This official appeared before the king, kissed the ground before him, and delivered his message. At this, the king ordered some of his noblemen and lords to go out and meet his brother's vizier, a full day's journey away. They greeted him with respect, wishing him prosperity, and formed an escort for him. When the vizier arrived in the city, he went straight to the palace and presented himself to the king. After bowing low and offering prayers for the king's health and success over all his enemies, he told him that his brother was eager to see him and invited him to visit. The vizier then handed over the letter, which King Shah Zaman took and read. The letter contained various hints and allusions that required careful thought. Once the king fully understood the message, he said, "I hear and obey the commands of my beloved brother." Then he added to the vizier, "But we will not depart until after 3 days of hospitality." The king arranged suitable quarters for the vizier in the palace and set up tents for his troops, providing them with all they needed, including food, drink, and other essentials. On the fourth day, the king prepared to travel, gathering luxurious gifts worthy of his elder brother's status. He appointed his chief vizier as the temporary ruler in his absence. Then he ordered the tents, camels, mules, and all the baggage and guards to be moved just outside the city, ready for the journey to his brother's capital the next morning. However, in the middle of the night, the king suddenly remembered that he had forgotten something important in the palace. He quietly returned to his private chambers, where he found his wife asleep in his bed, wrapped in the arms of one of the palace workers, dirty and disheveled from his work in the kitchen. The sight was so shocking that it felt as though the world had turned dark before his eyes. He thought to himself, "If she does this while I am still close by, what will happen when I am far away at my brother's court?" In a fit of rage, he drew his sword and, with one blow, killed them both, cutting their bodies into pieces on the bed. Without telling anyone what had happened, he left the palace and returned to his camp. There, he ordered an immediate departure and set off on his journey. Throughout the journey, the king couldn't stop thinking about his wife's betrayal. He kept asking himself, "How could she do this to me? How could she bring about her own death?" His grief was so intense that it began to affect his health. His skin turned pale, his body weakened, and he started to suffer from a serious illness that could have led to his death. The vizier, noticing the king's condition, shortened their travel stages and took longer breaks at rest stops, doing everything he could to comfort the king. As Shah Zaman approached his brother's capital, he sent couriers ahead to announce his arrival. King Shahryar came out to greet him, accompanied by his viziers, emirs, lords, and nobles, and welcomed him with great joy. The city was decorated in his honor. However, when the two brothers met, Shahryar couldn't help but notice the change in Shah Zaman's appearance. He asked him about it, to which Shah Zaman replied, "It's just the weariness of travel, and I've struggled with the change in water and air. But praise be to the Almighty for reuniting me with such a beloved brother." Shah Zaman concealed the real reason for his distress and continued, "O king of our time, I've been worn down by hard travel, and that's why my complexion has yellowed and my eyes look so tired." With this, the two brothers entered the city in great honor, and Shahryar housed Shah Zaman in a palace overlooking the pleasure gardens. But as time passed and Shah Zaman's condition didn't improve, Shahryar assumed it was because he was homesick for his own country and kingdom. He decided not to press his brother for more information, though he remained concerned. One day, Shahryar again said, "My brother, I see you've grown weaker, and your complexion is still pale." Shah Zaman replied, "It's an internal wound, brother," but still refused to reveal the true cause of his suffering, his wife's betrayal. Concerned, Shahryar summoned doctors and surgeons to treat Shah Zaman using all their knowledge and skills. For a month, they gave him medicines and remedies, but none of it worked. The memory of his wife's betrayal continued to torment him, and instead of recovering, his grief only deepened. One day, Shahryar suggested, "I'm going out hunting for a while, to enjoy myself and take my mind off things. Perhaps it would lift your spirits if you joined me." But Shah Zaman refused, saying, "My brother, I'm not in the mood for such things. I ask you to allow me to stay here quietly, as I'm fully consumed by my own troubles." So King Shah Zaman spent the night in the palace, and the next morning, after Shahryar had left for his hunt, he left his room and sat by one of the lattice windows overlooking the gardens. There, he sat in deep sadness, reflecting on his wife's betrayal, with painful sighs coming from his heavy heart. As he sat there, lost in thought, he suddenly noticed a small, private door in the palace swing open. From it emerged 20 slave girls, surrounding Shahryar's wife, who was incredibly beautiful, a model of grace and perfection, walking with the elegance of a gazelle longing for a cool stream. Shah Zaman quickly stepped back from the window, but kept watching them from a hidden spot where he wouldn't be seen. They walked under the lattice window and proceeded into the garden until they reached a fountain at the center of a large pool. There, they removed their outer garments, revealing that 10 of them were women, the king's concubines, and the other 10 were attendants. They paired off in groups, while the queen, left alone, called out, "Come to me, Saeed." At that moment, a man of large build, who had been hiding in one of the trees, climbed down and approached the queen. She welcomed him warmly, and they sat together, talking closely and enjoying each other's company. Meanwhile, the attendants also socialized with the women until the afternoon began to fade. After some time, the group ended their gathering. The attendants dressed again, and all, except for the man who returned to his hiding place, made their way back into the palace, closing the door behind them. When Shah Zaman saw this, he thought to himself, "Heavens above, my misfortune isn't as bad as this. My brother, who is a greater king than I am, faces this shame right in his own palace. His wife is secretly meeting with another man. This just shows that no one is completely safe from betrayal. May the Almighty protect us from putting too much trust in others." At that moment, Shah Zaman's personal sorrow seemed to lift. In comparison to what he had witnessed, his own troubles felt lighter. His melancholy, regret, and despair started to fade as he kept repeating to himself, I'm convinced that no one can fully escape such deceptions." When supper was brought to him, he ate with a good appetite, feeling relief after having refrained from eating much before. He gave thanks to the Almighty, praising him for the renewed sense of peace, and that night, he slept deeply, the most restful sleep he had experienced in a long time. The next morning, he ate heartily, his health steadily improving, and he soon regained his strength. 10 days later, Shahryar returned from his hunt. Shah Zaman went out to meet him, and they greeted each other warmly. Shahryar immediately noticed how healthy and revitalized his brother looked, his color had returned, and his appetite had improved after previously neglecting food. Shahryar was amazed and said, "My brother, I was so concerned about you and hoped you'd join me in the hunt to lift your spirits and enjoy the beauty of my kingdom." Shah Zaman thanked him, but offered an excuse for not going. The two brothers mounted their horses and rode back to the city. Once they were comfortably seated in the palace, food was brought out, and they ate until they were satisfied. After the meal, they washed their hands, and Shahryar, still puzzled, turned to his brother and said, "I'm truly astonished by the improvement in your condition. I wanted to take you with me on the hunt, but I saw you were pale and troubled, clearly weighed down by something. But now, praise be to the Creator, I see your natural color has returned, and you seem well again. I had thought your illness was due to being separated from your family, friends, and homeland, so I refrained from pressing you further. But now, I ask you to share the cause of your distress and explain what has brought about your recovery. Please, speak freely and hide nothing from me." When Shah Zaman heard this, he bowed his head in silence for a moment before replying, "I will tell you what caused my distress and loss of color, but I ask you not to press me about the reason for my recovery. Please, don't ask for further details." Shahryar, surprised by these words, said, "At least tell me what caused your illness and why you were so weak." "Know then, O my brother," Shah Zaman began, "when you sent your vizier with the invitation to visit you, I made preparations to leave. But just after setting out, I remembered I had left a gift behind in the palace, a string of jewels meant for you. So I returned alone and found my wife in my bed, embracing a servant. I was so overcome with rage that I killed them both, but afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That's what made me weak and pale. But as for the reason for my recovery, I ask you not to press me." Shahryar, astonished, shook his head. With anger rising in his heart, he said, "Indeed, the deceit of women is great. But you were right to take action as you did. Had it happened to me, I might have gone mad with rage. But let us be grateful to heaven that you are now healed. However, you must tell me what has restored your health and why you hesitate to explain." "O King of the age, again I ask you to excuse me from telling this tale," said Shah Zaman. "No, you must tell me everything," insisted Shahryar. "I fear, my brother, that the story will cause you even more anger and sorrow than it caused me," replied Shah Zaman. "All the more reason," said Shahryar, "for you to tell me the whole story. I urge you, by heaven, not to hide anything from me." At this, Shah Zaman told him all that he had witnessed, from beginning to end, concluding with these words, "When I saw your misfortune and the betrayal of your wife, O my brother, and I reflected that you are my elder and a greater king than I, my own grief seemed small by comparison. This realization lifted my spirits, and I was able to eat, drink, and sleep again, which quickly restored my health and strength. That is the truth, and the whole truth." When King Shahryar heard this, he was filled with an overwhelming rage, nearly choking on his fury. But he soon regained his composure and said, "O my brother, I do not doubt your words, but I cannot fully believe it until I see it with my own eyes." "If you want to see the truth for yourself," said Shah Zaman, "rise at once and make preparations for another hunting trip. Then hide with me, and you will witness it all with your own eyes." "Agreed," said the king. So he made a public proclamation of his intention to go hunting, and the troops and tents departed the city, setting up camp within sight. Shahryar left with them, settling himself among his men and instructing his attendants not to let anyone approach him. When night fell, he summoned his vizier and said, "Stay here in my place, and let no one know of my absence for 3 days." The two brothers then disguised themselves and quietly returned to the palace under the cover of night. They hid until dawn, positioning themselves at a window overlooking the garden. Soon enough, the queen and her attendants came out just as before, heading toward the fountain. They removed their clothing, revealing that 10 of the attendants were men disguised as women, and Shahryar's wife called out, "Where are you, Saeed?" Immediately, a man dropped from one of the trees and rushed into her embrace without delay. The queen laughed heartily, and the group indulged in their desires as they had done before, remaining occupied for a few hours. Afterward, they all performed their ritual ablutions, dressed, and returned inside the palace just as they had before. When King Shahryar witnessed this betrayal by his wife and servants, he was overcome with grief and exclaimed, "Truly, only in solitude can one be safe from the evils of this world. By heaven, life is nothing but one great deception." He turned to his brother and said, "Do not oppose me in what I plan to do," to which Shah Zaman replied, "I will not." Then Shahryar said, "Let us leave this place at once. We have no need for kingship. Let us wander the earth, worshipping the Almighty, until we find someone who has suffered a calamity like ours. If we find no one, then death will be more welcome to us than life." So the two brothers exited through a second private gate of the palace and traveled without rest, journeying by day and night until they arrived at a meadow with a large tree near a spring of fresh water by the sea. Both drank from the spring and sat down to rest. After a short while, they heard a loud and frightening roar from the sea, as though the heavens were crashing onto the earth. The sea churned with waves, and from it emerged a towering black pillar that grew higher and higher, rising toward the sky and making its way to the meadow. Seeing this, the brothers were filled with fear and quickly climbed to the top of the tall tree, hoping to observe the situation from safety. As they looked down, they saw that the figure was a huge genie, immense in height and broad in build, with a fierce and imposing presence. He carried on his head a crystal coffer, wading through the sea until he reached the tree where the two kings were hiding. The genie sat beneath the tree, placed the coffer on the ground, and took out a casket secured with 7 steel padlocks. Using 7 keys, which he drew from beside his thigh, he unlocked the casket. From within it emerged a young lady, fair-skinned and graceful in appearance, with a slender and elegant figure. She was as radiant as the moon on a cloudless night or the sun shining brightly. Truly, the poet Utaya spoke well when he said, "She rose like the morn as she shone through the night, and she gilded the grove with her gracious sight. From her radiance, the sun taketh increase when she unveileth and shamed the moonshine bright. Bow down all beings before her grace, as her unveiled beauty lights up the place. And tears flood cities when her glance, so bright, like lightning, flashes in the night." The genie seated her under the tree beside him, saying, "O dearest love of my heart, O lady of noble descent, whom I carried away on your wedding night to prevent anyone from taking your maidenhood before me, and whom none but I have ever touched or loved, O my beloved, I wish to sleep for a while." He then laid his head on the lady's lap, and, stretching out his legs that reached down to the sea, he slept, snoring loudly like rolling thunder. Presently, she looked up toward the tree, and saw the 2 kings perched near the top. She gently moved the genie's head from her lap, laying it on the ground, and stood up beneath the tree. Signaling to the kings, she gestured, "Come down, you 2, and fear nothing from this genie." The kings, filled with fear at being discovered, replied, "By the stars and your modesty, O lady, spare us and do not force us to come down." But she insisted, "By the stars, I command you to come down immediately, or I will wake my husband, the genie, and he will surely slay you both." She continued gesturing for them to descend. Terrified, the brothers climbed down, and she stood before them, saying, "You must do as I command, or I will wake this genie who will kill you without mercy." They pleaded, "O lady, we beg you in the name of the Almighty, spare us from this task, for we are already terrified of your husband. How can we do what you ask?" She firmly replied, "There is no escape from it," and she swore by the one who raised the heavens without support that if they refused, she would have them slain and thrown into the sea. Out of fear, King Shahryar said to King Shah Zaman, "O my brother, you go first and do as she commands." But Shah Zaman replied, "I will not do it unless you do it first." The 2 began arguing over who would go first. She said to them, "Why do I see you quarreling? If you do not act like men and fulfill my request, I will wake the genie." In their dread of the genie, they both complied with her demand. After they had done as she bid, she said, "Well done." She then took from her pocket a purse and pulled out a knotted string upon which were strung 570 rings. She asked, "Do you know what these are?" They answered, "We do not." She said, "These are the seal rings of 570 men who have been with me in the presence of this foolish genie. Now, give me your rings as well, you 2 brothers." When they had removed their 2 rings and given them to her, she said, "Truly, this genie took me on my wedding night, locked me in a casket, placed it in a chest, and sealed it with 7 strong padlocks of steel. He then cast me to the bottom of the sea, where the waves rage and crash, keeping me guarded so that none could be with me except himself. He claimed it was to preserve my chastity. But I have lived as I wished, and this foolish genie does not know that fate cannot be altered by any force, and that what a woman desires, she will have, despite the will of any man. Indeed, it is said, "Do not trust in women. Do not rely on their hearts. For their joys and their sorrows are tied to fleeting parts. False love they will swear by, but their hearts are full of art. Take Yusuf as a warning. Beware of their cunning and their smarts. Even Iblis ousted Adam through their tricks, as you know." And another has said, "Cease your blame, it leads only to anger. For my fault is not as heavy as you think. If a true lover I become, then I will not avoid the same fate that befell many in the past. For great is the one who, from the wiles of women, keeps his heart safe and sound." Hearing these words, the brothers marveled greatly. She then went back to the genie, resting his head on her lap as before. She turned to the kings and said softly, "Now, go on your way, and stay clear of his wrath." So they departed, saying to one another, "Heaven! Heaven! There is no power and no might except the Almighty, the Glorious, the Great. With him we seek refuge from the malice of women, for their cunning is unmatched in strength. Consider, O my brother, how this lady dealt with a devil far more powerful than we are. He has suffered a greater misfortune than we did, and that should give us comfort. Let us return to our countries and kingdoms, and from now on, we shall avoid marrying women, showing them what our actions will be." Thereupon, the two brothers returned to the camp of King Shahryar, arriving on the third day's morning. After assembling his ministers, viziers, and officials, Shahryar honored his viceroy with a robe of distinction and ordered an immediate return to the city. Once there, he took his seat upon the throne and summoned the chief minister, who was the father of the two young women who will be mentioned later, saying, "I command you to take my wife and bring her to justice, for she has broken her vows and betrayed my trust." The chief minister, following the king's orders, brought the queen to the place of judgment, where she faced the consequences of her actions. Following this, King Shahryar, consumed by rage, took a burning brand and entered the harem, where he took drastic action, causing harm to the concubines and their guards. In his distress, he swore an oath that any woman he married would be subjected to the same fate, her maidenhood taken on the wedding night, followed by her death the next morning, in order to preserve his honor. "For," he said, "there is no such thing as a truly faithful woman." At this time, Shah Zaman requested permission to return home, which was granted. He departed, escorted, and traveled until he reached his own kingdom. Meanwhile, King Shahryar ordered his vizier to bring him a bride for the night, as had become his custom. The vizier presented a beautiful young woman, the daughter of one of the emirs, and the king went into her in the evening. When morning came, the vizier was ordered to execute her, which he did, fearing the king's wrath. This went on for 3 years, every night, a new bride, and every morning, death. The people of the kingdom, horrified and outraged by the king's actions, began to curse him, praying for the end of his reign. Women wept, parents hid their daughters, and the city was left without a young woman suitable for marriage. Eventually, the king ordered his chief minister, who had overseen the executions, to find him yet another virgin bride. The vizier searched, but could not find any, and returned home in great distress, fearing the king's fury. Now, the vizier had 2 daughters, Shahrazad and Dunyazad. The elder, Shahrazad, was known for her vast knowledge. She had read widely, studying the histories of past kings, legends, and ancient cultures. It was said that she had collected over 1,000 books, filled with stories and wisdom from the past. She was well versed in poetry, philosophy, the sciences, and the arts. She was intelligent, gracious, and well-mannered. On that day, seeing her father troubled, she asked, "Father, why do I see you so weighed down with worry? What burdens you so deeply? Perhaps I can offer a solution." And she began, recalling a poet's words. Concerning this matter, one of the poets has said, "Tell the one who is sorrowful. Grief will not endure for long. Just as joy has no tomorrow, so will sorrow soon be gone." When the vizier heard these words from his daughter, he recounted to her, in full detail, everything that had occurred between himself and the king. After listening to him, Shahrazad said, "By the stars, O my father, how long will this slaughter of women continue? Let me tell you what is in my heart to save both sides from ruin." "Speak, my daughter," he replied, and she said, "I wish you would give me in marriage to King Shahryar. Either I will survive, or I will serve as a ransom for the virgin daughters of the kingdom, and I will be the cause of their deliverance from his hands and yours." The vizier was greatly angered by her words and cried, "By the Almighty, what folly is this? How could you expose yourself to such danger? How dare you speak so recklessly? Know that a person who lacks worldly experience can easily fall into misfortune. He who does not consider the end result will not keep the world on his side. The common saying is, 'I was at peace, but it was my own interference that brought me trouble.'" But Shahrazad persisted, "You must allow me to do this. If I am to die, let it be for the sake of others. I shall die as a ransom for the virgin daughters of the kingdom." "O my daughter," said the vizier, "how will that benefit you when you have thrown away your life?" She answered, "O my father, it must be done, no matter what the outcome." The vizier, now deeply distressed, rebuked her once more, saying, "I fear that the same fate will befall you as befell the bull and the ass with the husbandman." "And what happened to them, O my father?" she asked. At this, the vizier began telling her the tale of the bull and the ass. We hope you have enjoyed listening to the story. Next, dear listeners, we will discuss the essential takeaway that highlights the story of King Shahryar and his younger brother, Shah Zaman, which frames the 1001 Nights, offers multiple layers of moral lessons, themes, and reflections on human nature, leadership, betrayal, and the complexities of relationships. Overall interpretation. the story of King Shahryar and Shah Zaman serves as a reflection on the destructive effects of betrayal, the importance of trust, the corrosive nature of revenge, and the potential for healing through wisdom and storytelling. It invites readers to consider the balance between emotional responses and rational decision-making, especially in positions of power. Ultimately, it offers a message of hope and redemption, showing that even the most damaged hearts can find a path to renewal. Here are key takeaways from their story. Takeaway number 1. The devastation of betrayal. The younger brother, Shah Zaman's tragedy. Shah Zaman is deeply hurt and traumatized when he discovers that his wife is unfaithful to him. He kills her in a fit of rage and sorrow, abandoning his kingdom to visit his elder brother, King Shahryar. The elder brother, Shahryar's tragedy. Similarly, King Shahryar later discovers that his wife, too, is unfaithful, engaging in a massive betrayal that involves multiple servants and a widespread deception. This devastates him, leading to a severe emotional and psychological breakdown. Lesson learned from these two brothers' tragedies. The brothers' stories highlight how betrayal can shatter trust and wreak havoc on individuals' emotional well-being, leading to irrational and destructive behavior. It serves as a reminder of the intense impact of infidelity and the importance of trust in relationships. Takeaway number 2. The danger of overgeneralization and cynicism. After discovering his wife's betrayal, King Shahryar becomes cynical and concludes that all women are unfaithful. This leads him to a brutal cycle of marrying a new wife every night, consummating the marriage, and then executing her the next morning to prevent any chance of infidelity. Lesson learned from King Shahryar's conduct. Shahryar's actions demonstrate the dangers of letting personal trauma result in sweeping generalizations. His extreme distrust of all women leads to a cruel and unjust pattern of behavior, which only perpetuates more violence and misery. It's a cautionary tale against letting personal wounds harden into bitterness and unreasoned hatred for an entire group. Takeaway number 3. The destructive power of revenge. Both brothers are driven by revenge in response to their wives' betrayals. Shah Zaman kills his wife immediately, while Shahryar embarks on a long-term path of revenge by executing a new woman each night. Their anger becomes a toxic force that damages not only the objects of their revenge, but themselves and others. Lesson learned from both brothers becoming vengeful. The tale reveals how revenge, especially when prolonged or generalized, becomes self-destructive. It clouds judgment, leads to unjust actions, and spreads suffering beyond the initial wrongdoers, ultimately harming society as a whole. Takeaway number 4. The role of brotherhood and solidarity. Shah Zaman finds solace in his brother's companionship. When he sees that King Shahryar has experienced a betrayal worse than his own pain is diminished. This reflects the idea that shared suffering can bring people closer and help alleviate personal burdens. Lesson learned. This part of the story underscores the importance of familial bonds, emotional support, and solidarity in times of crisis. The brothers' shared experience of betrayal gives them comfort, showing how empathy and shared experience can help one cope with trauma. Takeaway number 5. Need for healing and redemption. Although not directly addressed in this part of the story, King Shahryar's eventual redemption through Shahrazad's tales is implied. Shahrazad, the vizier's daughter, offers the king a path to healing by telling him stories every night, which gradually changes his heart and brings him back from his cycle of violence. Lesson: even the most broken or cynical individuals can be healed through patience, understanding, and the power of stories or wisdom. Shahrazad's role as a healer through storytelling demonstrates the potential for change, even in those who seem beyond redemption. Takeaway number 6. Mistrust and the fragility of power. Both brothers are kings, yet their immense power and authority do not protect them from personal tragedy. Their mistrust, stemming from personal betrayals, leads them to act irrationally, even as rulers. This shows how fragile even the most powerful individuals can be when trust is broken. Lesson: leadership requires emotional stability and trust in others. The fragility of their emotional state reflects the importance of rulers maintaining a clear, just, and rational perspective, lest their personal issues harm their ability to govern effectively. Takeaway number 7. The importance of personal resilience. Shahrazad's intervention in King Shahryar's life shows that change is possible even in the darkest circumstances. Her courage and wisdom counterbalance the king's despair and cruelty, suggesting that resilience in the face of adversity can break cycles of violence and bring about transformation. Lesson: the story encourages resilience and the idea that even when people seem irredeemably lost in their own pain, compassion, intelligence, and patience can bring healing. Takeaway number 8. The complexity of human nature. Shahryar and Shah Zaman are not one-dimensional villains, they are deeply hurt individuals reacting to profound emotional wounds. Their initial cruelty stems from this hurt, suggesting that even destructive behavior can come from a place of vulnerability. Lesson: the complexity of human nature is a key theme. The story encourages readers to see beyond surface-level actions and understand the deeper psychological and emotional reasons behind people's behavior, while also recognizing the need for justice and healing.